Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar on data and data science. And today we've got Linda McIver with us, and we're going to get into some really good discussion about data and how to use that in your classrooms. But before we do that, I want to find out some information about our participants. But also we've got Linda's from, she was teaching at John Monash Science Centre. And I had the pleasure of going to one of her workshops. I think it was late last year, just in November or December. And I was really inspired by some of the things that Linda was talking about, with just showing some of the student samples of work, what she's been doing. And I thought it'd be great for our webinar to get Linda on to share some of those experiences and to find out more about data and how we can implement that in our classroom. So, what I want to do is have a look at today we've got a number of different people logged in. So here's the people that are logged in today, registration. So good day to people in New Zealand who are there, and the land of Tim Bell and CS Unplugged. So it's great to have some people across the Tasman. And we've got, obviously you can see there across Australia, we've got people watching. So good day to everyone. Before we find out a little bit more about data, I wanted to see with our audience a poll. If we can have a look at that. Our poll is about, what describes your role. So we can just see some bit more information about our people who are watching. Are you a primary teacher, secondary teacher, teacher or ICT specialist or DT specialist? Are you in the leadership role or a support role? So we're going to pop up a little poll now that you can fill in. And just give us your role if you can. A few more seconds to fill that in. And yeah, we're good. Well, I think we're good to go to have a bit of a look and see. So let's have a look at the poll. We've got 31% primary, 8% are secondary. We've got 46%, Linda, who are specialist computer people or ICT teachers. We've got 8% in leadership and 8% who are support role or PL leaders. So got a really good spread of people across the schooling there. So fantastic. So thanks for doing the poll. And, I want to introduce Linda now to take us through data and what it means in terms of the classroom and what we can do with our students. So thanks, Linda.
Awesome, thanks, Martin. Just leap into presentation mode. There we go. Okay, so as we're going along, I want to strongly encourage you, if you have questions or comments, chuck them into the system there, and Martin will hopefully notice them and stop me, and we can talk about them. Because it would be great to have this as interactive as possible. I know webinars not a terribly interactive format. Why me? I actually started life as an academic in computer science, doing computer science education research. And the reason I was doing that kind of research was because I wanted to make a difference to teaching. But I was frustrated because I wasn't making enough of a difference. So I actually went over to high school teaching 8 years ago, and I was teaching computer science and data science at John Monash Science School. And that was awesome. I loved connecting with the kids, and we got to do some really great and innovative stuff. But again, I was frustrated because although the kids in my classroom was having a great time with data and with computational science, I felt, again, I wanted to make a bigger impact. So when I left John Monash at the end of last year, I looked around to see who was doing data science education, because I thought I would join them and we could do something big. And I thought it seemed to me such an obvious idea that there had to be somebody already doing it. Turns out there wasn't anybody already doing it. So I founded the Australian Data Science Education Institute, which is a registered charity with the goal of putting data science education into schools in the way we teach not only digital technologies, but history, geography, even English, and obviously maths and science, because data science is really fundamental to the way we do just about everything these days. So I have some questions for you. You don't get to sit there passively the entire time. There's a link at the top here, if you can see my mouse, a short link to a Padlet where I have 3 questions for you. What do you think of when I say data science? What influences your decision making? And what impact does data science have on you? So if you can hop on over to that Padlet, I will switch over my screen to the Padlet in just a sec. So I'll leave that link up there a bit longer. And I think that Martin and Michelle have put it into the chat as well. So you should be able to see that link. And just give me some quick answers to those questions. Because one of the things I want to cover today, obviously, is what is data science and why do I think it's really important to get it into the way we do all of our education. But I also want to think about why that's important to society. And that's what that second question and really the third question are about. Because data science is used both for and against us quite a lot. Let's switch over to the Padlet. Oh, excellent. We've got people answering the first question. That's great. Beautiful. So I really asked that first question because I find that people hear the term data science a lot. It's one of the latest and greatest buzzwords, but it's actually something that a lot of people are a little bit intimidated by and don't necessarily understand what it really is. There are some great answers here that really sum it up nicely. I like this top one, exploring, sorting, and making sense of data. That's great. The investigation of data to answer questions or create information. That's beautiful because really the essence of data science is problem solving. That's perfect. Lots of graphs. I hope to expand your thinking on that one. There certainly are maps, but certainly are graphs, but it's so much more than that. I like that one too, analyzing information to draw conclusions. That's great. Turning data into information. Oh, that's beautiful. Stats and graphs and analysis, collecting and analyzing data. This is great. You've obviously got a really good sense of what data science is. I like this one, displaying and analyzing data. That's so important. It's the communicating. So that displaying in particular is something that tends to get lost. We think about the analysis. We don't necessarily think about the communicating, and that's a really important part of what I do in particular. Very large amounts of data sometimes, but you can actually do data science with 1 or 2 numbers, with 1 or 2 stats, or one bit of information. We do think a lot about big data these days, but that's definitely not all that data science is. Good, making decisions with data, prior experience, possible outcomes, consequences, trusted recommendations, friends, media, social media feeds, looking for patterns, data I can trust, research from credible sources. This is great. So we're going to look a little bit more as I go through the presentation about some of the things that research has shown influence our decision making. And I think you might be a little bit horrified, and it's one of the reasons we need to really get data science into our education so that we know more about the ways we can be manipulated with data. Let's look at this last one. We might come back to the last one a bit later if we have time, but it gives me something to talk about at staff meetings. The media uses data, so, having a critical eye on data presented to us, that is absolutely central to what I'm trying to do with ADC, to get critical thinking with data into the education. If we do nothing else but educate kids to look at the data that's presented to them, whether it's graphs or numbers, and think critically about it and ask questions about that data, then that's a bundle. I could not agree with that one more. Do politicians look at data? Maybe they should do it more often. They certainly should. There's some interesting ones here about using them for teaching, the student projects and things. and looking at graphs. This is an interesting one. It affects the ads that are showed to me on Facebook. It absolutely does, but it actually affects a lot more about our lives than that. Data science is used to control the information that we get shown in terms of the ads and things that you get on Facebook and Gmail and other services like that, but it also controls the search results that you get from Google. It controls a lot about your healthcare, about our political system, about the way we shop, the way we vote, all kinds of things. Data science has its hooks into pretty much every aspect of our lives now, and that's one of the key reasons why I think all students need an understanding of it. I like this one. With data and analysis, you can make anything sound credible. I do. Again, that's really crucial that we come back to that idea of critical thinking with data, because you can use data to manipulate people, and you can use data to misrepresent things. All right, there are some great answers there. So I'm going to snap back to my presentation and give you my one-line definition of data science, which is that data science is problem solving and communicating with data. So it's really that idea that data isn't interesting for its own sake. Data is interesting when it's being used to solve a problem and to change the world. It's to help us understand our world and to help us understand each other. But it's no use doing data science if you don't then communicate it. Somebody once, I think it was one of the Mythbusters, said the difference between science and just messing around is writing it down. And I think that that comes down to that's crucial to data science as well, that you have to communicate it. It doesn't matter if you found the most interesting result ever. If you can't communicate it, you might as well have not found it. So I want to start talking then about some of the ways that data is used against us. And this comes down to our decision making. One of my favorite studies on this is the Israeli Parole Board study, which some of you might have heard of, which is a study of parole judges in Israel some years ago. And what they tried to do was work out what were the most likely predictors, or the most reliable predictors of whether a prisoner gets granted parole in a parole board hearing. And they looked at the prisoner's gender, their race, the type of offense, how remorseful they were, how rehabilitated they were, and what their behavior was like in the prison. And they found that the single most reliable predictor of whether they got parole or not was not, in fact, any of those factors. It was how recently the judge had last eaten. So really, it came down to blood sugar. And of course, the judges wouldn't say that, and it's not because they were lying. When you ask the judges why they made those decisions, they said, well, we thought about the way all of those factors that we talked about, their behavior, their remorse, their rehabilitation. But in actual fact, they were rationalizing the decisions of their subconscious mind, which was, hangry, basically. So there's this idea that I first read about in Jonathan Haidt's book, which is that the brain is, or the conscious brain is like a rider on an elephant. Your decision-making, or your conscious decision-making, is sitting there on top of the elephant. And if the elephant decides to turn left, you're turning left whether you like it or not. But you quickly decide and tell yourself that left was where you wanted to go all along. That was totally the plan. But it's not a conscious process. You don't realize that your subconscious is zipping you around and really potentially against your conscious will. Another classic study that illustrates this is the honesty box study. This is a university in the UK who had an honesty box in their tea room, where you put $1 in every time you have a cup of tea or coffee to help pay for the supplies. And for 10 weeks, they put a picture above the honesty box. And one week it would be a picture of flowers, and the next week it would be a picture of eyes. So week on, week off, it was eyes or flowers. And they did that for 10 weeks. And they found that when it was a picture of eyes above the honesty box, people were 3 times more honest than when there was a picture of flowers. And again, there was no conscious intervention. People do not think they were being looked at. There was no conscious thought. It was that your behavior is changed by a series of factors that you're not even aware of. And that's where I find data science a little bit scary, because you get stories of organizations like Cambridge Analytica, where they collect a whole lot of information about us from our Facebook profiles and what have you, and then they can actually use that to manipulate our behavior to determine which ads to show us, to persuade us to vote or not to vote, or persuade us to vote in a particular direction. It's extraordinary the impact that kind of thing can have. There's another classic study in psychology, just to sort of ram the point home, where they looked at, was a language study, and they showed people a list of words and they got them to do a simple task with them, and the participants thought that that was the task, to do a memory task with the words. And half the participants got a neutral set of words, and the other half got a set of words to do with aging, grey, wrinkled, slow, things like that. And the people who got the words to do with aging left the building measurably and significantly slower than the people who had the neutral list. So there are just so many impacts on our subconscious mind and the way we make our decisions. If you go back to that Padlet for a minute and look at the way we like to think we make our decisions, and I would say exactly the same thing. I use data, I use experience and information and outcomes and consequences, trusted recommendations, looking for patterns, data I can trust, research from credible sources. But in actual fact, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in my subconscious brain that I'm not even aware of, that is having a massive impact on my decision making. Which means that people are phenomenally easily manipulated with data and with the outcomes of data science. This is one of the reasons we need to be a lot more aware of it as a society. Dana really made the comment that we are pawns in a game whose forces we largely fail to comprehend. My goal is to at least make us knowledgeable. So I also want to look at some of the crimes that get committed against data. And some of them are kind of accidental. I deal with scientists a lot, and a lot of them are not taught data skills. They're certainly not taught computation skills. I have a friend doing climate science at Melbourne Uni, and she's doing no computational units at all, and that's standard in that degree. And I don't know how you can do climate science without doing computation and without doing serious data science. But for the most part, our scientists are not taught to be expert with data. And one of the problems with that is that if you use a standard spreadsheet system, I'm using Google Sheets here, it's a little bit small, but I hope you can see it. If you have a data set that looks something like that, goes from 98 to 104, and you insert the default graph that comes with that, you get something that looks like that. And first of all, you can see that our 98 has disappeared altogether. But it looks like there's a massive difference between this lowest value and the highest value. And that's because by default, Google Sheets gives you a y-axis, which is the range of your data. So from the lowest value in your data to the highest value. Whereas if you were to do this if you were to represent this data in a valid way, you would actually set, I don't remember where it is, it's not easy to find either. You would set your y-axis to start at 0. Oh, I've forgotten how to do it. Okay. Vertical axis, minimum 0. Now, when you look at that data, you get an entirely different representation that shows you, first of all, your 98 is back, but the difference between the 98 and the 104 is now represented in a much more valid way than it was in that original graph. So if we go back to the presentation, you can see there that this was the data set that I put in and the default graph versus a valid graph is really dramatic. Now, that is not Google Sheets trying to deceive you or manipulate you. It makes sense to use the range of the data as the y-axis for the graph in a lot of cases. If you're looking at values between 5,000 and 5,010, you don't want to have a 0 in that scale because you won't be able to see the differences. But if you actually want to show the percentage difference between these different values and how significant the difference is, then you can make it incredibly deceptive by not putting a 0 into your scale. So this is the first question that I like to teach kids to look for when they're shown a graph, is ask, is there a 0 in that scale? Is that scale valid? Is it misleading? This is another classic example of misrepresentation, and this was a graph from the Daily Mail in the UK showing us that we're very lucky because climate change isn't a thing, because this graph starts at 0.5 degrees and it ends at 0.5 degrees, and this is showing the average temperatures and how they're changing over the years. So it's great, right? This is a fairly level graph. It bounces about as climate does, but it actually starts and finishes at the same place, so there is no issue. Of course, if you look closely, this actually starts at 1997 and finishes at 2012, and we have temperature records going back to the 1800s. Why is it only started at 1997? Well, that's because they've cherry-picked the data. If you look at the full graph, you can see that there's actually a very, very distinct upwards trend. And they just happen to pick a part that started and finished at roughly the same spot. And this is another classic data trick to try to show you the information that people want you to see. So again, we come back to that idea that scientists are not taught computational data science, but neither is anybody else. And yet it is central to the way most things are done now. Science is now done fundamentally with data and computation. There's still a lot of lab work, but computation is central and data science is central. And data science impacts on business, on health, on education. It's central to the way a lot of things are done in the real world, but we're still not teaching our students that stuff. My last crime that I want to talk about is crimes against education. I want to tell you about my friend Austin. Austin took my year 10 class many years ago, and I should point out that I have Austin's permission to tell this story. He's so proud of it, actually. He was a nightmare. He drove me insane. Very, very bright, clearly very bright, but he was sullen. He was uncooperative. Oh, I'll pause there. We have a question.
Very good. Thanks. I didn't want to interrupt your story, but Ruth had a question, and it's about data sets and where do we find some really good data sets. And while you're thinking about the answer, I can say that on Digital Technologies Hub, we have a good link to, it's called Government Hack. The data sets are in there, and there's a whole heap of data sets in that. We'll put up when we have the end of the webinar. Michelle will email you some information that comes out of the webinar, but definitely Government Hack to me comes to mind as a good data set to have a look at. Linda, I'm not sure if you've got some other data sets you can point to.
It's a great question. There's a huge amount of open data out there. The Atlas of Living Australia is a great set of data for all kinds of biological data, particularly citizen science observations and stuff. There's data.gov.au is an open government data set. A lot of councils now have open data. It's really difficult though sometimes to navigate all of these different sites and find a good data set. So this is one of the things that I'm starting to do on the ADSI website, is to curate a good list of data sets. At the moment, we've just got blogs talking about different data sets, but that's going to build into a large set. But if you're looking for a data set on a particular topic, hop onto the ADSI website and shoot us an email and we can help you find it, because we're pretty well across the space. Oops, okay, so I'm going to go back to my my story about Austin. So he didn't do a stitch of work all year 10. And part of the reason for that was that we were doing Scratch-based programming, and he already had some coding experience and some tech experience, and it was beneath him. So he was bored, and although I was unhappy about it, we were not allowed to let him do the real stuff that he wanted to do. He had to work his way through the stuff. So of course he didn't do any work. He was sullen, he was disruptive, he was incredibly uncooperative, he did no work, and he drove me insane. And then I got my role for year 11, which is an optional subject, and it's a computer science subject. And yeah, sorry, this was the type of code he was doing. He wasn't interested in that. He could see it was a kid's toy and not relevant to anything. He wasn't alone in that idea. You can see this was from a feedback survey where we were doing Scratch-based stuff, and the kids, for the most part, found it not relevant at all. They were just not interested. They couldn't see the point. And this was at a science school. So if science kids can't see the point of computation, then we have a fairly serious problem on our hands. Anyway, I got my year 11 role, looked on to see who was doing my year 11 subject, and there was my friend. I was so upset when I saw him on there. I thought, why would you do this to me? Well, you don't like me. I don't like you. Let's not do this. I was so upset. Anyway, Austin turned out to be one of the best students I've ever had. The first lesson that I had with him and with that class, we started doing some Python programming, and we were writing a chatbot for the artificial intelligence unit. And he went home and he wrote a perfect 1,000-line English to Pig Latin translator. I tripped it up on Rhythm, and I tripped it up on Qantas, which is kind of cheating, and he went and fixed those straight away. And then he spent some time making it more modular and more efficient and nicer code and more readable code. He went on to do one of the best assignments I've had for the capstone project. He worked in a team, which I would have said he wasn't capable of, and they did extraordinary things. They wrote an app for a dolphin touring company in Port Phillip Bay to record information about the dolphins to use it for research. And Austin wrote the server-side application, which took the data and printed out all the right forms and did some analysis. And his friend Michael did the app that was an iPad app for them to actually enter the information. It was an extraordinary project. It was incredibly well documented and really professionally done. Another of those capstone projects, this was just last year, these kids worked on a genomics project with Dr. Sonika Tyagi, who's on the left of that picture there, and they wound up doing such innovative work and groundbreaking work that they presented it at the Lawn Genome Conference in February of this year. So that's year 11 students presenting at an academic conference because they'd actually done work that no one had done before. And that was the crux of the project that I ran at John Monash Science School, was the idea that these kids could do real projects with real data, solving real problems, helping scientists with their work, and actually having the chance to make a difference. It's a far cry from Scratch. When we shifted from Scratch to data science in year 10, we found the perceived relevance. And this was the first time we ran the unit, so it was flawed. We didn't have teachers in all of the classrooms that actually could teach it. There were a lot of issues with this subject, but the one thing that did shift immediately was the perceived relevance. If you recall, if you look at the perceived relevance of the Scratch-based programming through to the perceived relevance of data science, it's a massive shift in the first time we ran it, even though it had a lot of issues the way we ran it that first time. So this is the crux of why I use data science to teach digital technologies, from spreadsheet skills to data skills and through to programming skills. Kids can see the point because they have the opportunity to make a difference with this stuff. My one last story is about Tia, and this is, Tia is not a cautionary tale. Tia is extraordinary, but she wasn't interested when she came to John Monash in technology and computer science. She was not interested at all. She was very interested in arts and very interested in science, very strong math skills, but her only experience of digital technologies before she came to us was one Adobe Photoshop subject, where she followed step-by-step instructions that told her what to do to a particular image, and was cookie cutter stuff. And she, for some reason, did not find that at all interesting. She came to us and started doing computational science in my year 11 class. And Tia did a neuroscience project. She worked with Professor Ramesh Rajan and created him some software to visualize his neuroscience experimental results. And from that moment onwards, computation was everything that Tia wanted to do. She's doing a not computational science. Sorry, I've gone blank on the name of her degree, but she is doing computing at Melbourne Uni together with a science degree, and everything that she wants to do is now computing focused, because she sees the power of computing, and actually she turns out to be phenomenally good at it, even though she had no background in code and no experience with it. She picked it up really fast and did extraordinary things. So Tia is one of the reasons why I think everybody needs to experience data science and computer science. They all need to at least try it, because at the moment, a lot of kids are saying, I am not interested in this and it is not relevant to me, who might actually turn out to be phenomenally good at it, might actually turn out to be their thing. I won't go into my history because we've got better things to do, but I tripped and fell into computer science by accident, and it turned out to be something that I really loved and felt like I could make a difference in. And there are a lot of kids out there who are not having that experience because they've still only got those very Photoshop subjects that are their only experience with ICT. So the new digital technologies curriculum is changing that, but it's still really difficult because there's so many teachers out there who don't have coding skills, and I certainly know how little time you have as a teacher to gain new skills. So how do you teach data science and computer science without devoting huge chunks of your life that you don't have free to learning to program? I am a computer scientist. I would like everybody to learn to code, but realistically, that's not going to happen tomorrow. So where do we start? Well, fortunately, it's not hard to start because data is really at the core of STEM. Measure something, form a hypothesis, make a change, and measure it again. That's the scientific method, and it's also fundamental to the way we can do data science. So if we leap into our biodiversity study, and please chip in with questions if you get, if I go too fast on this one, because I'm so familiar with it, I might skip over it too quickly. This is a primary school unit that I've developed on biodiversity. So it's building your science skills and also starting to build your data skills. And we can really do this from foundation to grade 6, depending on how you go about playing with the data. The idea here is that we're working with the school's environment. So we're looking at garden beds in the school, and we're getting kids to basically collect data about the garden beds and analyze that data. So they're starting out by counting the number of and type of plants in a particular garden bed, and you'll have a whole lot of groups of students. You could do this across the entire school and have each class focus on a particular garden bed, or you could, within one class, have groups of 3 to 4 picking different garden beds. So you count the number and types of plants, and you group them. If you know the names of the plants or can identify them in some way, then you group them that way, but otherwise you can just group them by features, so grassy plants, flowering plants, something like that. And Ideally, take photos of different plants so that you can help identify them, and take a photo of the whole garden bed as well. And then think about how you might display this information. So here you are in your first graphing exercise, and your young kids can graph the plants just by stacking different colored blocks in the classroom. Like, here's all my grassy plants. I've got 6 of them, so I'm going to stack up 6 blocks. And then your middles might do it by hand on paper, or if they're up to that, they can use Excel or Google Sheets or whatever spreadsheet package they have available to them. And when you get up to the senior school students, the grade 5, 6s, you look at graphing it with, you know, proper labeling and making sure that you make it clear, perhaps adding images to each bar of the bar chart so you can see which plant each bar represents, things like that. Step 2, you're going to observe the soil type. So we're collecting a lot of data about these garden beds. First, we've got the number and types, the different types of plants. Now we're looking at what type of soil we've got. Is it clay soil? Is it sandy? Is there mulch? Things like that. So you might want to put up a table, something like this, where you've got the color of the soil, the hardness of the soil, the moisture content, the mulch, and whether it's rocky or not. Now, step 3, and they'll either love this step or hate it. You might need to separate them into the people who can manage mini-beasts and the people who can't. But you get them counting the different types of bugs in the soil. Again, if they can take photos of all of the beasties so that they can identify them later. And you can take this as far into biology as you want, looking at the different characteristics of each of the different types of bugs, look how many legs, what part of the soil they're found in, and things like that. But again, here is the data part, you're counting them. So we've got a table where we've got 6 slaters, 3 fast ground spiders, large numbers of ants, and 13 worms, and then we've got this many in the soil, this many on the leaves, whether they were in the mulch or deep down in the soil and things like that. Again, this is an opportunity to graph the information, but also thinking about more creative ways of graphing it than just using the default graph created by your spreadsheet. So you might make a bar chart which has ants stacked up to show the number of ants, or using even representations. So you might have 1 ant represents 100 ants if you've got 200 ants and you can't represent them all. Step 4, we've got the groups presenting a summary of the number of bugs and the number of different types of bugs. So that's 2 different bits of information there. You've got, okay, we only found 4 different types of bugs, but there were 150 of them in total. Or you might have 8 different types of bugs. And then what we're looking at is to compare the diversity. How many different types of plants are there, and how many different types of mini beasts are there between the different garden beds, particularly the different types of beds. So what we're looking at is, does the number of types of bugs seem to be related to the number of types of plants? In other words, if there are more different types of plants in the one garden bed, are there also more different types of bugs? In garden, does the mulch seem to make a difference to the diversity? When garden beds where there's no mulch were counted, were there more bugs or less bugs? And then also looking at where are the bugs, on the leaves, in the dirt, in the mulch. And this is, again, you can pull in your biology here and talk about different habitats and where do bugs like to live and why do they like to live there. So why is it that worms are deep in the soil, whereas your slaters are mostly on the surface, for example. So then step 5 is where you can get really creative and let the kids find their own questions, or you can explore a particular question that you allocate to the whole class. Some of the examples I've got are, what effect does mulch have on garden biodiversity? What effect does higher plant diversity have on mini beast diversity? What effect does adding compost have on mini beast diversity? what effect does regular watering have, and what effect might fertilizing have on mini beast diversity. So at this point, they have a hypothesis. For example, I think that fertilizing will mean there are a lot more different types of mini bees. And then they design an experiment to answer the question. So some of the suggestions might be if they're looking at mulch, add or remove mulch, and then count the bugs again after 2 weeks. Oops. Sorry, lost my screen now. Or plant some new plants of a different type, add some more plants to the garden bed and count bugs again after 2 weeks. But the key question is, the key idea is they think of their own question and they design an experiment to answer that question. Step 7 is really important. They predict an answer to that question. That's your science there, that's your hypothesis. What do we think is going to happen? Brainstorm some reasons why that answer might be true and also some reasons why it might be false. And then implement the experiment. So do it. Do the fertilizing or adding or removing mulch. And make sure that you have one bed that is a control. So if you add mulch to a bed, then you have one bed that you don't add mulch to. And then you do your testing again. You do your counting again, and you compare the results with the old results. So this is, you can do this entire thing, and it covers your science and your math. Martin, you want to contribute?
Yes, I was just waiting for you to end there. That's fine. I was just going to make some points there because I think that unit would be really useful for teachers to have a go at doing. I mean, one of the things we're advocating if you're doing your digital technologies lessons is to look at what you're already doing and try and weave in the digital technology. So in this case, the data. How does I'm sure a lot of teachers will be doing something along the lines of mini beast in years 1 and 2. I know quite a few schools who do that, and I thought that's why this unit was really quite useful. But also, I just want to talk about, we're talking about representation and presentation, and in that, I think it's important to sort of talk about, how do we represent, let's say if it was the spiders, the ants, and so on. So you might do that with images. Again, if you're doing Excel spreadsheets, that might be the bars or the columns that you're sort of using. But that notion that you're representing some information, but then that notion of presenting the information might be in a chart or a graph or a table. Can you just talk us through some of that?
What do you mean? So just different ways of presenting the information.
Yeah, just different ways of presenting the information, but also representing the information. I think you touched on it a little bit.
So the idea of using, for example, one ant to represent 100 ants, things like that?
Yep.
So I think this is really important because it comes back to that idea of communicating your data effectively and communicating your results. If you put 100 ants on the page, you're not going to be able to see anything else. And it's really hard to make sense of. There's too much information. But if you have one ant representing 10 ants, then you can have 100 ants just with a stack of 10, and it's much, much easier to see. And so you get to that idea of how do I make this interesting, but also readable and also valid. So is this actually an accurate way to represent the data that I'm trying to represent? Does it communicate to people the point that I'm trying to get across, i.e., there's vast numbers of ants and only a few other things or whatever it is that you're trying to show? It comes back to those central communication questions that you ask. Whenever you're trying to communicate, whether you're giving a talk or making a set of PowerPoint slides or writing an essay, they're the same questions. Who am I talking to? What am I trying to say? And am I getting my point across? Am I really stressing the key points? Those are the really fundamental questions of communication, and they apply just as much to visualizations as they do to any other form of communication.
Terrific, thanks, that's excellent.
So I won't go through this in detail because there's a lot of it, but at the end of that document, which I think you've all got in your email, I've included the points out of the curriculum that I can see that it covers, and there's probably others. With this unit, you don't have to do the whole thing. You can do you can take bits and pieces, but I think Martin's point is really important, that do it in the context of something you're already doing. It doesn't have to be mini beast. Use this as a template or for some other exploration. I know there's one on the DT Hub already about rubbish. And I like to do that one in the context of, can we make a change to our school? Can we actually do something here that makes a difference? So if we count the rubbish, but in particular count the types of rubbish, and find that vast amounts of it is actually chip packets from the canteen, well, can we change the way the canteen sells chips and then change, have less rubbish in the yard? So you make the change and then you measure it again, and then you see if you've had an impact. And again, that scientific method, it's also data, and it's also changing your own environment and having an impact on your own environment. I'm working with a parent at one school who was looking at doing a study on the impact of a development that's a bit controversial and happening in the area. So can we count traffic and see what different, what kind of traffic, what's the traffic level like now? How many cars are they expecting to add to the community with this development? And what impact is that going to have on our local streets? So cite it in the context of something that matters to you and that's relevant to your community. Okay, I'm going to skip over to the renewable energy lesson, which is pitched at 7 and 8, unless, Martin, do you have anything else you want to say about the biodiversity one?
Okay, I think that's a good idea, because we've probably got another 15 minutes to go, and I think they covered it nicely. I'll just to let people know that I've put a handout for some of the sequences that are data related, and I've called that handout 3. So in your own time, when you wanted to have a look at some of those data related sequences, we've provided a handout. But I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say about the 7 and 8 energy lesson. Thanks.
Awesome. Okay. In the handout, you will have this renewable energy lesson here. There's a link to the data set. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight into the data set rather than, and I can, you can read through that in your own time and shoot me any questions you have, but I'm going to go straight to the data set and show you what it looks like. So it downloads as a CSV file, which is comma separated values, and you can load that into any spreadsheet package. I've got it on Google Sheets here, and there's just so many conversations you can have about this data. Now, what this data is it's postcode data for small-scale solar installations. So what it does is it tells you how many solar installations there have been in postcodes around Australia. We have data from 2001 to 2016. So that's the previous year's data. And then we have monthly data over here. So we've got January 2017, February. We have the data by number of installations. So that's just how many people have installed solar. And we also have it by kilowatts. So basically what solar capacity got installed in that time. So first of all, there are 2 different ways to explore the data, and they might give you quite different results, which is an interesting conversation to have in itself. What I find always entertaining and incredibly frustrating is that this is the postcode column. Does anybody know where postcode 0 is? Or postcode 200? They are, of course, not postcodes, because all Australian postcodes are 4 digits. What has happened here is that Google automatically, we look at the format, you will see it's in automatic, and Google has automatically removed the leading zeros. So that should be 4 zeros, but Google very helpfully makes that 0, because of course it knows that 0, 0, 0, 0 is numerically equivalent to 0. So we've got our first lesson, our first kind of cautionary tale here in data cleaning, which is that your spreadsheet can really stuff you up. In particular, dates are a minefield. I'm not going to go into that now, but perhaps that's a talk for a whole other webinar in itself. Anyway, so our postcodes have been munched about. That's okay. We know what's happened to them, so we can deal with that. But it is something you have to think about, that the spreadsheet tries to be very helpful and can really stuff you up. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to know which postcodes are the best, where is the most solar in Australia. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort it, so you can get an extraordinary amount of information just by sorting. So I'm going to sort, I have to sort by specific range because, just to make it clear, I want to sort by column B, which is installation quantities. It's arguably more relevant to sort it by kilowatts, but let's go by quantity for the moment. So I'm going to sort range, have a header row, and I'm sorting by previous years. Okay, so I just want to look at the aggregate up to 2016. There's no data before 2001 because that's when they started collecting the data, and it's actually when the renewable energy, I can't blank on the term. There was an incentive to install renewable energy. Okay, so I have sorted, I've sorted backwards. I've got my zeros first. I really don't want to scroll all the way down. So I'm going to sort the other way and go largest to smallest. Okay, so what I now find out is which postcodes have the most solar installations. And it's fascinating because of the top 20 or so, you can see that there's a really significant drop. The top two have over 10,000 installations, and you just go down 20 and you're already down into the 5,000. So I find that really interesting that the top two are massively better than any of the others. And if you look, you can see that most of the postcodes in this top 20 start with a 4. There's a few 6s, and there's two Victorian postcodes. So what we're looking at is that WA and Queensland are actually have been really good in their installation.
Linda,
yeah.
Can I just say one of the things there just makes me think, once you see the postcode data, you could also then put that into a Google Maps, like we did with the at the start of the program. We had the Google Map with the people who have registered. So you could have, because a lot of times if you look at those postcodes, it doesn't quite mean much. But when you can see them dotted on a map, that's also quite useful.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great way to visualize this information, is to put it into map form so that you can see where this stuff is. And one of the things that you can do is you can work out by state what the total installations are, and then color in the map, do what we call a chloropeth map, which is colored sections of the map showing by the color what the value is. So your 10,000 might be a bright yellow, since we're talking about solar energy, and your really low values might be, I don't know, brown. So that's a really good way to visualize this information. So the key thing, I know we've only got 5 minutes left, the key thing I want to show you about this data is that I did this very simple analysis the first time I looked at it. I sorted it, looked at the top 20 and went, wow, WA and Queensland have been amazing for solar, and everyone else is actually pretty sucky. That's really interesting. I wonder why. And when I looked into the media, they had basically represented it exactly the same way, but it is a classic mistake, because when I wrote myself a quick Python script to calculate the average by state, and I found that WA and Queensland just didn't even feature. They were actually the lowest on average, the lowest installers. It would just so happened that the top postcodes were in those states, but the average for those states was really low. So it's a really great conversation to have about misunderstanding and mischaracterizing your data. Say, well, what would you assume, given that you can see the top 20 there, what would you assume about this data? And then find out, well, actually what you assume, the first impression that you get, turns out not to be right. I'm just gonna, we've only got 4 minutes left, I think, by my clock, so I'm gonna skip back to the slides. The crucial goals for me for the Australian Data Science Education Institute is to make sure that teachers are skilled up so that the kids can learn data literacy, which is really just critical thinking with data. It's those questions about, well, where's the zero on that scale of that graph? Where did that data come from? What was your sample size? What was your population? Things like that. Really basic data analysis skills and visualization, so making your visualizations both valid and compelling, but really putting all of those skills in context. So in the context of problems that kids care about, in the context of problems in the community, in the context of actually being able to make a difference. And also learning those tech skills in the process of doing that. So there's a lot of data that you can access out there that you really can't manipulate in a spreadsheet. One of the first data sets that I used was an AEC data set, which contained all of the votes for the Senate in Victoria for the federal election. That was over 3 million lines, and it just doesn't even open in Excel. Or if it does, it takes 10 minutes and then crashes, you know, in a heartbeat. So there are some data sets you just can't use in a spreadsheet. So starting to learn those programming skills, but in particular, learning them in context. And that's what I found with the kids at John Monash, that when they were putting it in context, and seeing why they need these skills, they could see the point. And I got a lot of comments and the feedback at the end of the year, like, I really didn't want to learn programming and I couldn't see the point, but now I'm actually using it everywhere and I can see how important it is. So you can find resources at the website, adsi.org. You can join the mailing list to keep up with what we're doing. As I say, only founded the organization in February, so we're still building. One of the key things I want to do is build a community of teachers who are doing this kind of work so that we can support each other and share resources and really make it easier on ourselves, because at the moment I think there's a lot of people doing amazing things out there but just in their own little niche and having to build everything from scratch. So if we can share as much as possible and really support each other, I think that's really important. Thanks so much to the Digital Technologies Hub for making this possible and for letting me speak, and thanks to Martin and Michelle for getting it all going today. It's been great.
Well, Linda, I thought it was absolutely fantastic what you went through, and it's given me a lot of insights. I'm sure most others who are watching. I was particularly interested in that Padlet, just watching those the notes go up. That was really insightful, just looking at what people were saying. I think you've given us a good a heads up to think about the data literacy, as you were mentioning, and really think about when you're doing those spreadsheets, because I know that half the thing is just, we're probably happy that kids are using a spreadsheet, but then just those comments you're making about thinking about the data and how you're presenting it, and those conversations I think are really important. But that comes up with, having teachers having the confidence and the skills to use those spreadsheets, and it's probably something that takes time. But you've given us something to think about and to be aware of. So I really appreciate that. And just to let people know that some of Linda's resources we're going to put up on the hub. So we've asked her to do some more resources, and so when they're available, we'll provide some promotion via Facebook when they're ready. But there's plenty of resources on the hub as well, and as Linda pointed out on her website, so please make use of those. And once again, I'd thank you, Linda, for the time and effort you made into putting into the website, into the webinar, and to really taking us through that, what you think is important with data science. I appreciate that very much.
Thanks, pleasure. Thanks, Martin.
Okay, and we'll be in touch, and thanks everyone, and enjoy and hopefully make use of those resources. And if we've got any other questions that we weren't able to answer, I'll provide them to Linda and she can provide it to us for email and we'll pass it on. But at the end of the webinar, there'll be a short little survey, and if you can give us some feedback on the webinar, that'd be fantastic. But until then, next webinar, we've got, we're going to basically go from scratch through to Python programming. So we're looking at the visual programming, the transition from visual to general text-based programming, and just to see, you know, if you've got students at year 7 who want to do that jump across, or if you're interested from primary to see what they do in the secondaries and vice versa, that's what we're going to be looking at. So, and just a bit of a skill up in terms of how to do your Scratch versus your Python programming. So join us for that. That'll be the last Wednesday of the month in July. What are we in? August. Yes. Okay. Anyway, see you later. Bye-bye.
See you later.